Hi, friends. Welcome to the Choose Your Life podcast. I'm Talia, and in today's conversation with Jen Coursey, Executive Director of THRIVEtoday, this is one that I believe so many of us need right now. We live in a time where it is easier now than ever to be connected, and yet increasingly more difficult to actually be present. When I first started therapy last year, one of the ways I wanted to measure my progress was by how well I could practice being present. I realized I could physically be somewhere, but mentally and emotionally be somewhere else. And thinking about what was next, or replaying old conversations, or getting lost on my phone. And lately, I realized I am not alone in this struggle. Even people I deeply respect have been naming how social media and their phones and the constant busyness has become a huge distraction, quietly robbing them of stillness and connection. And I understand that greatly. There have been weekends actually where I've unintentionally put my phone in a drawer or left it in another room because I could feel how much it was pulling me away from the moment in front of me. We are living in a way that is so different than any other generation in human history. Our rhythms have changed, our capacity for stillness has shrunk, and we are still feeling the ripple effects of the COVID shutdown, prolonged isolation, even current political unrest and constant noise. Even the church, which is meant to be a place of relational refuge, joy, and peace, is struggling to embody those realities right now. And this is why this conversation today really does matter. Jen Coursey is a mother of two active teenagers, Matthew and Andrew, as well as a speaker, blogger, brain skills trainer, co-creator of Thrive Training, and co-author of the 30 Days of Joy for Busy Married Couples with her husband, Chris. She also writes a blog detailing how to use critical relational skills in marriage and family life. Jen is the executive director of THRIVEtoday. In the life model, there's a term called BEEPs, behaviors, events, experiences, people, or substances that we rely on instead of the relational joy and peace that the Lord designed us to live in. These BEEPs often operate at a subconscious level, pulling us out of connection and into distraction, numbing, or performance before we actually even realize what's happening. And beneath them is often attachment pain, those unmet needs for connection, safety, and joy that our brains are constantly scanning for. In this episode, Jen and I explore what is really happening when we struggle to stay present. We talk about how beeps and attachment pain are connected and how this dynamic shows up in our relationship with the Lord and others, and what it looks like to gently and faithfully return to the present moment with peace and joy. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode just as much as I did recording it with Jen. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe and to stay connected. And for those of you who are regular listeners, please be sure to share this episode if you find it encouraging. And with that, here is the episode I have with Jen. Have a great day. Hi, Jen. I'm so grateful to have you here today. I've been thinking a lot about how much your work at THRIVEtoday has been helping so many people just in like relational pain and rediscover or discover for the first time joy. And I really cherish all the ways that you and Chris are pouring into people. So,
I'm excited to be here with you. I know we had to work things out with the schedule, and I'm just excited that we've gotten this time together.
me too. I'm really excited. I'm excited for this conversation to hear your insights on what it means to be present in a world that, in so many ways, just pulls us in a million different directions. I've heard your life story and the weight that depression that you've experienced before in your life, and to be where you are today, it's such proof of the miraculous healing power of the Lord and what He does through relational healing. So, when I think about healing, I just think about how important it is for us to be in a place where we are at might not have been our fault, but it is our responsibility to see like how it's currently impacting who we are today and impacting our present reality. So you've just grown so much, and I really appreciate that. When you think about the world that we're living in right now, where everything is just like loud and fast, and that we are constantly connected in a digital world, like what do you notice is this doing to our ability to be present with God, with others, and even with ourselves?
Oh goodness, where to even start on that? Our attention span is so much shorter than it used to be. And so just that alone, even our attention for reading or videos or things that are designed to grasp our attention, even that is shorter. So our attention to be present with each other and with the Lord and to be quiet and able to enter in, it's really taking a hit. I mean, and I would say part of that is the busyness, the ease of distractions, the accessibility, the demands in life, like just, the to-do lists are long. And so we have that excuse to not, that we don't have time to, it's like a luxury to slow down or be present or drink in joy or drink in the moment. Multitasking. I fall into all these traps myself, like I am famously a multitasker, and you just can't do two things at once as well as you can do just one thing. And yet I still fall into that trap. So I think definitely part of it is our culture and the faster pace. I think that also tells us something, though, about the relational skills, because some of the relational skills ideally are things that we should have learned in our community and family growing up. And if we didn't learn them in that season, then we're operating without them or with a weakness in those. And that plays out in how we live our lives. And I think enough people are experiencing similar relational skill gaps that it's now showing up in culture. Because I think one of our relational skills is quieting ourselves. And when we can't be alone with our thoughts or be still and quiet and tuned into our body, which is actually a skill, and when enough people can't do that well, it leads to a culture where we want to be distracted because we can't handle, being quiet and still. For me, I did not have that skill. I know you referred to my story. I did not have that skill. That was one of the biggest holes I had. So in college, when I was up and down, my seasons were up and down, and there were moments when I was high functioning and moments when I was not functioning. But during one of my high functioning seasons, I was taking like 21 credit hours in college, working, and I was the teacher assistant for a calculus class because I was a math major. And my idea of resting was grading calculus papers while watching a movie because that was about as slow as my brain could handle. Part of that was the lack of quiet. Part of it was what we call return to joy skills. So when we have big emotions and we don't know how to handle them, we don't want to feel them, right? Because they feel like they'll swallow us or they'll consume us, or that, we don't want to go there. And distracting ourselves, being busy, those kind of things help us disconnect from those things temporarily. And so I think it's both the pace of our culture, but the pace of our culture is somewhat set by the fact that there's so many people that don't have these skills and are wanting to distract themselves.
So many thoughts I had from that in terms of being able to quiet, the capacity to quiet, like how it is a skill that we have to grow capacity for. I know for me, when I first started the quieting skill, it felt like unbearable. It felt like I was like, everything in me does not want to stay still and to stay here, because those thoughts do get pushed to the forefront in ways that are numbing, or are scrolling on social media. I know that's a common one. Really does stop us from being able to actually sit with an emotion and having that emotion be felt, which is important that we live in a relational community where people can sit with us in those emotions. Because you don't just go from being able to handle emotions to not, or from not being able to handle emotions to handling them by yourself, right? You need
Right.
other people.
Definitely. Yeah. Because these are skills we learn from others. And so if we didn't learn them in our childhood, when ideally we would have, then we're catching up. We're playing catch up in our adulthood, and we need people there to teach us those skills too.
Did you have someone who sat with you in that quiet? Like, how did you build up that skill?
That's a great question. I did have somebody that would sit with me for just a few seconds. Like I could only do a few seconds at first with another person. Now, so one of the things we talk about with skills is there's skill acquisition and there's skill strengthening. So skill acquisition is is needed when I have nothing on file at all in a skill. Skill strengthening, if I've even had an example once or twice in a skill, my brain has something on file. It's not a usable something without a lot of practice. I have to strengthen it. And then once we've had that, it still helps us for sure. That's something that is very beneficial over time. But even if we've had it a couple of times, we can start small and start strengthening it on our own. And so sitting with somebody in quiet helped, but I also, started doing it on my own also. And it was a matter of repetition and practice and starting really small because I can relate when I would sit to quiet, all of the thoughts and the emotions. I mean, even when I started trying to do this and I was working on emotions and I was working on being able to feel them and not be overwhelmed by them and just like feel through them instead of pushing them away. Whenever I would quiet, my to-do list would then spiral in my brain and I'd be sitting there thinking about all the things I needed to do and then say, well, this is silly. Why am I sitting here quieting? I just need to go do the stuff and then I'll be able to quiet. Well, I never finished the to-do list enough that I could actually quiet when I was trying to do all the stuff first. I needed to learn how to quiet in the midst of.
How does beeps tie into that? Because when we are using beeps, I know life models talk about this concept of beeps for behaviors, events, experiences, people, or substances, and how we use that as a replacement for joy. Can you unpack that a little bit for us, for people who are new to that?
Sure. So when we are stuck in emotions, or what we like to call attachment pain, which is, it can be laid on top of all emotions and just makes everything harder. Attachment pain is wanting to be with somebody who's not available in that moment. It can be because they're busy. It can be because they're gone. It can be because they're traveling. It can be because they've passed away. It can be because the relationship is broken. But when we want to be with somebody who doesn't want to be with us back in that moment and isn't available, it causes some of the worst pain our brain knows. That feeling of being alone and not having our desire to be with somebody reciprocated in that moment. And that pain is a pain that our brain doesn't like to feel. And so it likes to try to distract from it, to turn it off temporarily. And so that list of beeps are things that our brain can gravitate towards to try to temporarily shut off that attachment pain in our brain, that signal that's saying, this hurts a lot. And so different behaviors that we can do, certain experiences that we can gravitate towards, whether they're, there's all kinds of different experiences. It can be adrenaline type experiences. It can be just comfort. I mean, there's a lot of different things. If we're doing it in a non-relational way, events, like you said, people. So it's funny that people's on that list. Some people get confused about that sometimes because they're thinking, well, but I thought this was instead of like connecting relationally. Why is people on the list? Well, it's when we use people or wanting to be with people, not in a relational way, but just in a, I need to feel better and you can temporarily make me feel better kind of a way. Not in a, I care about you and our relationship and how this is good for both of us, but just, I need you to solve this problem for me. And then substances. I mean, that one is somewhat self-explanatory. I mean, whether that's alcohol or drugs or sugar or carbs or chocolate, those things can temporarily turn off that alarm in our brains that says this hurts. But it doesn't turn it off for very long. And so then that's where we feel the need for more.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what about someone who their whole life, all they've known a lot of is beeps, and it's really a generational thing, right? Because like it gets passed down from like, these skills were not taught to us to experience relational joy. And so we only give others what we ourselves possess. Like, how do we even begin to see, oh, I'm actually relying on beeps as my joy and not actual relational connection? How can we see that?
That's a good question. So how can we become aware of it? I think asking yourself the question, where is my joy? Do I have places with people that bring us mutual joy where we're glad to be together, and we can feel that joy of being together and it's mutual, or do I not have that? And you can also look at those places in your life where you just kind of feel restless and you just need something. Like if you didn't do it right now, if you didn't pick up your phone, if you didn't have that cupcake, if you didn't reach for that square of Hershey's chocolate, or even if you waited, like let's just say you waited 5 minutes before you did those things, does that feel like, does your anxiety build? Does the tension build? Does the feeling of like, oh, but I really need this? That's a good sign that it's a beep, it's a craving, it's our brain's attempt to turn something off through a non-relational avenue. So I hope that kind of answers it.
No, that's incredible, because that's like, if you can't delay in that, or if when you do delay, your body's like screaming for that thing, it's showing you like, yeah, this is actually not, this is having a little bit more power on you than it needs to. So
Yeah.
that's good.
And I mean, that's one example of it, but even if we can delay, that's good. It's actually good training for our brains. The other thing we have to learn is that when our brain is screaming, this is going to kill me if I don't get this thing or this connection with this person, that I can survive that. We can't survive without air. And if we're like under the water and can't get to the surface to get air, that will kill us. But these things speak to our brain like we're in that scenario. Like if we don't get it air in the next 10 seconds, we're going to die, kind of a thing. If I don't get chocolate in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to die. That's not actually true, but it feels true in the moment. So even delaying helps our brain realize, oh, I can survive feeling like I need this and not getting it right away.
You did talk about attachment pain a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I do think that a lot of these, like you said before, the beeps, they're coming from that attachment pain, maybe earlier wounds around connection, like safety, belonging. And you did talk a little bit about what attachment pain is. So what would you say to someone who's realizing that the constant busyness or that over connection or over reliance is a way that they are avoiding pain? Like, someone coming to that realization, it's like, well, then what do I do in this situation?
Such a good question. Well, first of all, I would invite you to be gentle with yourself, because there's a reason that you are chasing after those things and feeling the need for those things, because your brain, like we were talking about earlier, doesn't feel like it can survive without it. It feels like it's just going to be too big if you don't get it now, or if I have to wait to scroll on social media or whatever, if I have to sit quietly by myself. So if you're realizing that's really consuming for you, it's good, first of all, to realize that it is consuming. The awareness is that first step. And then what do I want to do about that? Is this something I want to become less dependent on? If so, again, being gentle with myself, giving myself waiting 5 minutes before I do have the piece of chocolate or get on my phone, trying to sit quietly for a few minutes. Or if you're aware that you don't have the skill of quiet, and it feels like, when I first started practicing the skill of quieting, I just got more tense and anxious, and like my body would start vibrating almost, because it just felt awful to try to quiet. And so then I didn't have the motivation to want to, at least in terms of the reward in the moment for quieting, because I felt worse after quieting instead of better. But I needed to be intentional about it. So I needed to take shorter moments and build up to it. And now I have to say, quieting has transformed things for me. Like now I can be running around trying to get out the door, running late, get in the car, and before I put my keys in the ignition, just stop for a moment and take a deep breath and feel my body relax. I might be running late, but 30 more seconds isn't going to make or break it. And when we quiet, it's actually our brain is releasing serotonin on demand. That's called the on-demand release of serotonin. So we're training our brains to release serotonin when we tell it to. And with practice, we can get to the point where we tell our brain that we need that, like by doing that pause and taking those deep breaths. And then it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Exactly.
So anyway, that's just a very exciting side note to me. But as far as what do you do if you're noticing that you're just consumed with beeps and attachment pain is driving that? Give yourself grace. Pick a few areas that you want to start delaying or reducing how much you're depending on those things. Practice your quieting skills. Find some areas for true joy. Look for avenues where you can connect in true joy. Having coffee with a friend, taking a walk with a friend, connecting with somebody from church, or, people in nursing homes are often, they just don't have a lot of company and they get excited to see somebody. So their faces light up to see somebody who's coming to visit them. So if you don't have a lot of relationships yet in your life where you can have joy, go create one. Go to a nursing home and start visiting somebody and create some joy there. So both pause on some of the substitute joys and find ways to build in some of that authentic joy.
That's beautiful. I love that so much. And that's totally anti of what we talked about with people and like the using of people, but like I'm going to go and I'm going to create a joyful experience for someone who really is in need of it. That's beautiful.
And we get the benefit too, because we're creating a joyful experience for them, but then they're authentically glad to be with us and we get to have joy too. So it's like, it's mutual. We both benefit.
And this does soothe that attachment pain, right? Being in company with people who are glad to be with us.
That's a great question. Yes and no. So does it soothe the attachment pain? Yes and no. Like you said, there's past attachment pain and there's present attachment pain. So there's pain from our childhood. And often with pain from our childhood, one of the things we actually need is some healing. So the Lord to meet us in those places and to be with us in those places where we felt alone. It doesn't solve the fact that that person we wanted to be with wasn't there, but at least we're not alone in that feeling. So when we feel like we're not alone in the midst of a feeling of aloneness, it helps. Our brain does have a circuit that says like, it's you I want to be with. And if you're not available, nobody else will do. Does that make sense? So like when my husband is traveling, I can have coffee with friends and I can do something fun with my teens, but my brain is still saying, this is all nice, but my husband's not here, So it doesn't take the place of my husband not being here, but it builds relational joy that gives me capacity to not feel as taken down by the fact that my husband isn't available right now. So it helps, but it doesn't solve it at the same time.
It doesn't take it away, but it maybe like alleviates the heaviness of the weight of that loss.
Yeah, we don't feel alone in the midst of the pain anymore.
Okay. Yeah. There is something that is really prevalent. I know that you guys did some work recently on church hurt and like those just the rupture of that. And I think that is something that really is very prevalent happening today. There's just been so much like divisiveness happening and divisions. And so in terms of that, like what does it look like for the church to truly be a place that models relational skills, not just theology or teaching, but like actually living out joyful, peaceful connections with each other?
Oh, that's a big one. I think a big part of why so many people are getting hurt in church is because a lot of maturity has fallen out of the church, and these relational skills have fallen out of the church. So ideally, we are in multi-generational communities where there's people ahead of us in maturity and there's people, not as far along as we are. And we're pouring into those not as far along, and we're receiving from those further ahead, and we're building, peer relationships with those who are in the same area of their journey. And that is the ideal place where we learn relational skills, and those who are further down the road help make it safer in the midst of the bumps of things going wrong, because the people that are learning aren't doing it well yet, right? We're not handling our emotions all that beautifully, or conflict all that beautifully, or just relational ruptures all that beautifully. But those who are further down the road can help us in the midst of that. They can be a voice of wisdom and care in the midst of that. So partially, I think our churches don't have that as much. Partially, I think some of these skills have fallen out. And so in the church, many of the people aren't reflecting the character of our Lord. And so these relational skills help us live out the character God has given us, or develop our character, or live out the heart that he's given us. And when we're missing relational skills, then, when we don't know how to quiet, we're not taking good care of ourselves. When we don't know how to be with our emotions, we let emotions in a relationship, blow up the relationship. When we don't know when to stop, like when we don't recognize somebody else's overwhelm cues and that they're getting to their limit, then we aren't necessarily safe in that moment for them, because we are pushing past their limits. So there's all these things that cause pain in relationships. And that's all throughout the world, not just in the church. But ideally, you would want the church to be this safe place where they've got this down. Like there are the elders that are looking over and helping people navigate the bumps in their relationships. And the people in the church are aware that their desire is to grow these skills so that they can better reflect the character of Christ, and that there's going to be conflicts, and yet we want to keep the relationships bigger than the problem. And so I think some of it is an awareness of what our goal is. Some of it is we then need to be practicing these skills that have fallen out. And some people in the church, think, well, Jesus is everything, so I don't need anything else. I don't need people. I don't need relational skills. I don't need to pay attention to this brain stuff, because Jesus is enough. Well, Jesus is enough, but he gave us people, and he gave us brains, and he gave us the opportunity for relational skills. And so we still need to tend the garden he's given us so that we can show up in a way that makes us a blessing to others, and that we can have, mutually joyful relationships and mutually satisfying relationships as we navigate the bumps that are inevitable with relationships. So I think the church has the Jesus part right, but maybe not the reflecting him. And I think the other piece of it, honestly, is that a lot of the churches believe we just need to make better choices. Jim Wilder and Dr. Marcus Warner have a book, Solution of Choice, as to how that theology of choice has ended up so much in our churches. And so we just need to believe harder and choose better and make better decisions. And that's what's going to change us. But we get frustrated when that doesn't work, because that's not how God designed us to just decide to be better and make better choices. We need relationships. We need relational skills. We need all these things. We need community around us in order to grow.
And it's actually not biblical to think that, because Jesus literally says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And so it's not based on our choices. It's based on our attachment to him, that he gives us joy and he gives us peace. And it's from that place that we then live in a dramatically different version than our own choices would ever lead us to become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because of how often we are seeing ruptures in the church. When is it safe to say, I want to stay here, I want to be a part of the repair, I want to show like a sticky attachment love and work this out? And then what is it at a point in time where we say, okay, this is actually not safe or beneficial or life-giving for me anymore?
So that's a great question about when is it the time to stay and when is it the time to leave. I heard Dr. Wilder share recently that how do you find safe people? And he actually said that, similar to what we were just saying, that, in therapy or in healing, you may create an artificially safe environment on a temporary basis, but for growth, we're all growing. We need peers. We need peers who also need to grow. And therefore we aren't doing it perfectly and they aren't doing it perfectly. And there is going to be hurt. So in order to grow, we need to not be in a completely safe, like, bubble, if that makes sense. For growth, we need a little bit of pain. And yet, for healing, we may need a temporarily, almost artificially safe environment. Not artificially safe, but just like life isn't safe in that sense, but we may need a bubble for healing on a temporary basis. What season is it? I think of that in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for this and a time for that. And so, but how do we know what time it is? The Lord tells us there's a time for staying and a time for going. How do we know which time it is? And I think the answer is listening to him, because there may be times he tells us to stay even though it's painful, and there may be times he tells us to go because he no longer needs us in that circumstance. I think it's not just about what we need in those moments, it's about what he's doing in the situation, but he also knows our capacity and what we need. And so if we're listening to him, he can say, this is what I'm doing right now, and this is your place in it, whether it's staying or going. In other words, I don't have an answer. There's not a formula answer. It's there are times for both is kind of the answer. And we don't know, without connecting to the one who knows all things, which time it is right now.
And that's why it's so important for us to develop hearing his voice and being in his presence and realizing what directions he's nudging us in. Because for some people, their brokenness might, I think attachment patterns play a really big part in that. And some people, their growth is going to come from staying and obviously being able to feel an emotion or stay with the rupture. And other people might be able to stay like, I have to stay here. Like, I'm not going to chase unhealthy things, and I'm going to stay secure and rooted and grounded. And we can meet in the middle and serve the Lord in the middle.
Yeah, because there are definitely places for boundaries and places for leaving, and then there's places for staying. And again, the Lord knows our capacity and what we need in that moment, and what we need and what he's doing in the situation. Because I think sometimes what he's doing is bettered by us leaving, and other times what he's doing is bettered by us staying, even for the other people, not just for us. And I'll also say, those are the situations also where it's super helpful to have developed a community that listens to the Lord together, even if it's a small group of people, because those are the places that it's harder to hear and to rely on our own discernment. And we need other people who can pray with us and pray for us and check our discernment for, like, does this thought bring you peace too? Is the Lord's peace in this thought when you are praying about it? And not that everybody has to always be exactly on the same page. That isn't always going to happen, but there's kind of a safety net in not having to rely 100% on my own listening abilities, but having others that can listen with me.
Which is all that we're talking about too. Just that need for having that healthy group of steadfast love in our lives. It's beautiful. I do want you to chat a little bit about Thrive Today, the work that you and Chris and your team are really doing that is impacting so many lives. I resource you guys often. I would love to be able to share with the listeners where they can find you and what you guys do.
Sure. Well, thank you. So yes, our ministry is Thrive Today. And life is about relationships, but a lot of them don't work because it takes skills to make relationships work. So that's what we do, is we train people in relational skills so that we can use those skills in our relationship with each other and our relationship with the Lord. Because our desire is to see everybody thriving in relationships with each other and with the Lord. And so we sometimes like to call ourselves the practice people, because it takes practice. Like we're training, we're learning these skills. And just like you don't learn to play the violin by reading a book about it, you can learn about the violin and learn about music by reading a book about it, but you got to pick it up and start playing, and usually play it pretty badly for a while until you can learn to play it well. And the more we practice, the more accomplished we become, and the easier it comes to us, and the more natural it feels. And so that's what we do, is we help people practice relational skills. so that they can become practiced and it can feel more natural for them, and they can have those skills to rely on in the moments when they need them in their relationships. We do our premier training is a 5-day in-person training where you're with people who are further ahead than you, and we actually have our tracks kind of progress from one to the next and train each other, so that we're not just learning how to learn these relational skills for ourselves, but learning how to pass them on and train others in them. But we also know that not everybody can get there. We have created opportunities for people to plug into online courses online, self-paced, or groups where they can practice online together. We have some books and resources that have facilitator materials so that people who want to run a group themselves pick something up and do it with a few friends, so that, because in person is best. In person is the ideal place that we're learning and practicing and acquiring and strengthening these skills. That's not always an option for all of us, which is why we do have online opportunities for people to plug into. But the ideal is to do something in person with other people, whether it's coming to an in-person training or practicing with others around you. We have practices that you can do so that you can start learning these relational skills. And as far as where you can find us, THRIVEtoday.org is our website, where we have a lot of different resources. We have different assessments and different freebies on our site. And we have a podcast, the Relational Skills in Real Life podcast. So that's where people can hear stories of how relational skills have impacted people's lives. It's a story-based podcast, about 10 minutes each for those. And you can find out about our upcoming event dates and the opportunities to plug into practice online, or see what resources are available to take home and practice with the people around you.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm so glad to be with you, and I'm glad that we had this time. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.